Inside your Croquis Foundation series, so far we've already worked on page 4, which was learning to draw arms and legs. Today what we're going to work on is the static pose. And then for your homework, it's going to be page 6. You're going to do 2 more of these drawings that we're going to do together right now. The tools that you're going to need for this video is going to be a clear ruler. You're going to want a number 2 pencil. As well, you're going to want either like a 2H artist pencil, or if you have a mechanical pencil. And then of course you'll want more of a detail eraser and a regular size eraser and a pencil sharpener. Alright, let's get started. During this demo, what we're going to do is you're going to be drawing on this side while we're following what's going on here. And then we'll also use this girl as a guide to start also practicing a little bit before we come over here and draw out into empty space. Eventually, by the end of the demo, you'll have something that looks like this. Later on, this is page 6, so you're going to do 2 more complete drawings. So by the time you're finished, you'll have done 3 static poses. As we go through this lesson together, sometimes you're going to be drawing guidelines and marks, and we're going to be using an 1H or 2H pencil to do that. You can also use a mechanical pencil for doing these guides and guidelines. Then once we have our guides and guidelines in place, we're going to start drawing her skin, so we'll start fleshing it out. When you do this, I want you to go back to your regular number 2 pencil, or if you have an artist's HB pencil. So we're going to start working on the static figure pose, and this is page 5 in the handout. If you're following along with this video and all you have is blank paper, what you can use is the legal size paper, so it's 8.5 inches wide and it's 14 inches long. And what we're doing is if you come down 3/4 of an inch from the top edge, and then if you make the head 1.25 inches tall, then you can follow this demo by calling that 1 head, and you'll be able to come all the way down to 10 heads at the floor, and then still have a little bit of room left over on the bottom of the paper. So that's only if you're following with blank paper. Okay, so when you start to draw out your pose, the very first thing you need is you have to establish the size of her head. So we already have it here, but I want you to go ahead and just lightly draw in on this rectangle that's provided. And then we're going to split this in half. And we already have the halfway line on here, but I want you to go ahead and also draw this in as a habit. And you're going to make sure that this line goes the full distance of the page. This line here is called the plumb line, and this is what gravity will be following along. The next thing you'll need to do is you'll need to establish 10 heads down. Now on our paper we already have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but I want you to go ahead and practice this. So come in and measure 1 head starting from the top of her skull to the bottom of her chin. So you can see here is top of her skull, bottom of her chin would be 1 head. And then move this down to the bottom of the chin, so we can find 2 heads down. From 2 we can go down to 3, and so on. And then it will be perfectly 10 heads down. Now that you can see the locations for all 10 heads going downwards, the next thing we want to do is we want to find the locations for the features on her body. And this is going down the 10 heads. The easiest thing to do is to start with the numbers that are just rounded off. So for instance, 2 is the armhole, 3 is the bottom of her rib cage, and 4 is the full hip, and 9 is going to be her inside ankle. So we'll come here to 2 heads down, which is the bottom of the armhole, draw a light guideline using either your 1H or 2H pencil or using your mechanical pencil. The next one is going to be the bottom of her rib cage at 3. And then we got the full hip at 4. As well as all the way down to her inside ankle at 9. And we're making sure that all of these lines are exactly right angles to the plumb line. The next set of measurements that are easy to find is the half measurements. So we have shoulders at 1.5, the high hip at 3.5, the knees at 6.5. So now for the shoulders are 1.5, so we're going to go from the chin down towards 2 and find the halfway point. For me, since I'm right-handed, what I like to do is I like to turn her head towards my right hand, and I like to look at this horizontally, so then it's easier for me to find what I'm guessing is halfway, and then I can come in here and measure it with my right hand. If you're left-handed, simply just do the opposite. The next one is going to be 3.5. So skip between 2 and 3 and come down to between 3 and 4 so we can get 3.5. The next one is going to be down to 6.5. So this is her knee level. So come all the way down to 6 and then we'll go halfway towards 7. Double check. If your measurement's off a little bit, then fix it by making a slightly larger mark. Double check. If you like it, then turn that into a cross mark. So you should have a short cross mark here at 6.5, 3.5, and 1.5. And let's go ahead and square those out. The last set of measurements that we'll need are the ones that are 1/4. So for instance, the bust apex is at 2.25. The hip bones are at 3.25. The crotch level, 4.25. And the outside ankles, 9.25. So now we're going to come down to the bust apex, which is 2.25. What I need to do first is I want to find 2.5 lightly. And then I can go from 2.5, I can go halfway again to find just 2.25. I'll make that longer and put in my guideline. The next one's 3.25. So we already have 3.5, so I can easily come in and just find the halfway between those for my 3.25. Then we want 4.25. This is going to be the bottom of her swimsuit, or the crotch level. So again, we need 4. Heading back towards 5 is 4.5. And then halfway again, 4.25. The last one we're going to need is all the way down here at 9.25 for the bottom of her ankle and the outside ankle. So I want to find 9.5, come back up, 9.25, put in our guideline. So now we can come in and we can just double check the levels versus the girl that's already provided. So here we have the shoulders at 1.5, the bottom of the armhole is at 2, bust apex 2.25, bottom of the rib cage is 3, top of the hip bones 3.25, the high hip 3.5, full hip 4, bottom of the swimsuit or crotch level 4.25, 6.5 is the knees, 9 is the inside ankle, and 9.25 is the outside ankle. Now that we have the heights for all the different features, we need to find the widths. So what are the widths of these features? The first thing we're going to need to do is, in order to find these widths, we're going to use some measurements from her face. So at this point now, we need to go ahead and start to plot in some of the features on her face so we can get those measurements. So the first thing we want to do is we want to find the halfway point on our head. Make sure you draw your line long enough beyond the side of the face here so we have room to write the symbols for 1/2. Now let's find the next one. So this is going to go from the halfway point down to the chin. Again, we're finding what's half of this. And that's going to be our next one down, which is going to be 3/4. The next one down is going to be 1/8. So again, this is going to be from the 3/4 mark heading down towards her chin. And over here you'll write 1/8. Now this 1/8 measurement, you don't really need it, but we're trying to establish 3/8, and that we're going to put on this side. So again, it's only the halfway point and the 1/8. Now between these, the total would equal 3/8. So the first width that we need to find is her shoulder width. The total of her shoulder is 1.5 heads. If we were to split it in half, we need 3/4 of a head going this way and 3/4 of a head going that way. So I can come in here and measure 3/4 of a head down, and then from the plumb line I can go out 3/4 to her right side, and I'll do the same thing here to her left side. And then I want to double check this measurement. So I know from the top of her skull down to the shoulder level was 1.5 heads, and it's also 1.5 heads wide. So I could take this measurement all the way to the shoulders and make sure that the total is equaling 1.5 heads. Once you've double checked them, if you like them, go ahead and make them darker. Now the next one that is also 1.5 is the full hip down at 4. So I'm going to come down here to 4 and we'll do the same thing. The next largest measurement is going to be her high hip is exactly 1 head. If you recall, the high hip is down here at 3.5. So if you want, you can make that a little bit darker, and then we're going to measure out half of a head this way, half of a head that way to get a total of 1 head. And again, just double check that this was 3.5, so here's 4, and you just went up to 3.5 for your high hip. The next 2 measurements are the same, so both the bottom of the rib cage and the top of the hip bones are 3/4 of a head total wide. Again, if we want to start from the halfway point and come half of 3/4 this way and half of 3/4 that way, that half is this 3/8 right here. So this is going from her eye line down to the bottom of her bottom lip. And then I want to double check this, so I'm going to come in here and get my 3/4 measurement total, so top of the skull to the bottom of her tip of her nose, and then I can just double check 3/4 total, 3/4 total. Now that you have your dots in place, you can start to see this hourglass shape. So it's going from her full hip into the waist and then back out to the shoulders. As a beginner, what I want you to do is go ahead and just connect these dots using a straight line. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get this trapezius muscle. So now this girl that I have in this image, she was a professional swimmer, athlete, and so she has a very large neck as well as trapezius muscles from swimming. But when you do your models, the shoulder is going to be much lower than that. The measurement here is going to be in between the shoulders, 1.5, and the chin at 1, so halfway between those. So this will be 1.25 coming down. And connect that back to the shoulders. So for all of these guidelines, we've been drawing with our 1 or 2H pencil, or you've been using a mechanical pencil. At this stage now, what we're going to do is we're going to start fleshing out some of her skin, and I want you to go back to your number 2 pencil. Make sure that your pencil is nice and sharp, and we're going to start working with the waist area. So far on our measurements, we know that the bottom of the rib cage is here at 3 heads down, and the top of the hip bones is right here at 3.25. In between those two is this waist area. So come over to your model and just draw in the curve that you see here from her natural waist. So over here where we have between 3 and 3.25, we just drew straight lines. I want you to erase those straight lines. And we're going to duplicate these same curves that you see here on her natural waist. Now as we move from the waist up into the shoulder area, it's not going to be a straight line. What it's going to do is it's going to bow outside a little bit. So let's come over here and find this shoulder. So for instance, here was that 3/4 of a head. Here it is again. This is what you're aiming for. And you'll notice the rib cage bows out before it comes back to the shoulder. So go ahead and let's get that now. We're going to go outwards, come back into the shoulder. And try this on both sides. And that helps you get a feel for the curve. And then come over here and do it on your new croquis. So it should have a slight outside bow feel to it. Now let's move on to doing her hips. So come over to the model provided and just get a sense of the curve for this hip heading towards the knee. And let's do the other side. And now let's do it here on your new croquis. Make sure that when you're drawing this, you're connecting back to those dots. To get a better sense of what's going on over here, let's go ahead and add in this bottom edge of her swimsuit. So over here on the model, we can see that at 4.25 is the bottom of the swimsuit, and get a sense of about how wide it is there, and do the same thing here at 4.25. Remembering to keep it fairly narrow, because when we do a back view, this will be wider on a back view. And then practice here, this would be the bottom of her swimsuit cutting upwards, and it's above this 4, which is the full hip. So we would come straight across to this side, and you'd have the same swimsuit cut on this side as well. So let's get that over here on our new croquis. And let's do this lightly in pencil first. So go ahead and do one side. And then whatever you did on this side, make sure you duplicate it on the opposite side. And again, make sure it's evenly spaced on both sides of the swimsuit so it's centered with the plumb line. And then the bottom of the swimsuit, you can either just go straight across or slightly curving downwards. Now, one other thing that you would see on your model would be her belly button. And where that would be is at 3 1/4. This is right at the top of her hip bones. You would see a belly button here. So again, it's centered with the plumb line, 3 1/4. These guidelines that we have here on the body are very important for later on when you start drawing clothes. So we don't want to lose them. What we're going to do is, using our number 2 pencil, I want you to make it darker here above the rib cage at 3, as well as at the top of the hip bones, 3 1/4, and then the high hip here at 3 1/2. So make it darker here inside of her body. And then the waistline, let's go ahead and shade that. And this is to remind your brain that this is where she will bend and flex. Let's do a little more detail here at the bottom of the swimsuit. So if you look back at the photo that's provided, you'll notice that there's like 2 seams on here because there's some binding on that edge. So what would happen is one edge is the bottom cut of the swimsuit. And then there will also be the second layer for the binding. And eventually that binding will disappear as it's heading back between the legs. And do the same thing over here. Now, something else that would happen is if we were to make this into bottoms, they would stick out beyond her skin just a little bit. So come out here to the bottom of 3 1/2, so the high hip, and above this binding here, and let's erase that hip. And we're going to draw her clothes 1 layer outside of her skin. So just make it go 1 more layer thicker than her skin. And for the binding, what I'll do is I'll just round that out like a little bump. And then for the top edge of her swimsuit here, let's go ahead and put another row of binding. And now it's easy for you to see that when you're drawing a pair of jeans or a skirt, that the average waistband would be at the top right here at her high hip.